Uh, Today is June 2nd, 2021. My name is Josh Kim. I'm an intern at the Houston Asian American Archive, and I'll be talking with Nikki Son, who's a composer currently pursuing her DMA at Rice University Shepherd School of Music. Um, Nikki, I'm going to ask you questions in a roughly chronological order, but we'll just follow the conversation wherever it goes. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is when and where you were born.
Uh-huh. So I was born in Seoul, Korea in 1992. So now I'm 29. It's crazy.
Cool. Yeah. Um, so what was it like? What was it like growing up in Seoul? What was your home environment?
So we moved around a lot. So I was born in
Okay.
Seoul, but within like 6 years of elementary school, I went to four different elementary schools. Like we always moved a lot. I have a lot of
Mm,
siblings too. I have three younger siblings. I have a
okay.
sister and two brothers.
Okay.
And yeah, we originally are from the southern part of Korea. So my
Okay.
dad was born in Gyeongju, which
Uh,
yeah, do you know where that is?
roughly, yeah.
Yeah, and my mom's family lived in Ulsan, which is even more south.
Okay.
So we have like, so I used to also live in Ulsan, and also I lived in Busan for a while too. So we moved quite a bit.
Yeah. Got it. Um, so yeah, like what was I guess I'm wondering like your home environment was like growing up, like tell me maybe a little bit about I guess your parents and they had on you and on the family and yeah, just sort of your early memories, I guess. If you could share some like early memories of growing up.
Yeah, so my dad's a lawyer, and my mom also studied and worked a lot. So I always had a nanny who was taking care of us, and also like our grandma lived with us here and there too. So I had a really busy parent, and yeah, so I think I had to learn to be independent pretty early on. But I started music really early. I started playing piano when I was 20 months, which is crazy.
Okay.
Like when I look at 20 months old now, like, like that's not even a person. But I did that apparently. And so, like, music was always like a big part of me. I did piano all throughout, and I also sang a lot during like elementary school up until like maybe 13 years old. So I did a lot of singing competitions actually. It's like a
Okay.
whole culture in Korea where like kids have like kids songs and like we have like music competitions. So I did a lot of that. My siblings were also given like piano lessons and violin lessons, but they were never really into it.
Mm,
So, but we did a lot of different things like um, going to after school programs is like a big thing in Korea. I don't
yeah.
know if you know about it. So, like we did like taekwondo, we did like art, music, like all sorts of things. So I think as a child, I was like a pretty busy one. Like always had a schedule to follow up. And actually, I during my second grade, my house was a little bit further from school, so actually I got my first cell phone when I was 9 years old, which is super early. And yeah, I don't know, like very busy parents and also busy children. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so if you were nine, that would be like 2001 or something like that. Yeah, like what
2000,
did
yeah.
cell phones look like then? I forget. I never forgot because I wasn't conscious, but
Right. So like this cell phone that I had was like kind of like this, but it had like a
yeah.
little flip, like only on the
Okay.
bottom, the keypad, and then I had a
Yeah.
big antenna too.
Yeah.
Which is super cool. And then
Yeah.
I mean like Korea was really quick about these like technology and like cell phone industry.
Right.
So like I would change my cell phone like maybe every year or so just
Yeah.
to like keep up, and my mom
Yeah.
was always like super down to like buy me stuff.
Yeah.
She was busy. I think she felt bad. So I had like
Yeah.
all sorts of like different phones. I had like
Yeah.
one that like this way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's funny. I do remember I grew up mostly in the US, but I did live in Korea for like a couple of years, and one of the biggest things that surprised me is like all these kids like having cell phones, because I was in like elementary school, like middle school, and like
Right.
at least at that time, like in the US, like where I was before that, I was like, yeah, cell phones aren't a thing you have until when you're older. But
Right. Like high
one thing that
school.
stood out to me,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So, as you said, you got into like music very early.
Yes.
Um, so that was at like your parents sort of like drove you to do that, and like, do you think that like how much like what when you were younger, like sort of what was like motivating your engagement with music? Like, to what extent was it your parents' influence? To what extent was you, cultivating your own motivation, or like maybe from other sources as well? So, like, um, how did like you engage with music? I guess when you were that young.
Yeah, so actually, my parents didn't want me to be a musician. They knew that it was not very stable.
Yeah.
Um, the career path for musicians, what even is that? So my parents were hoping that I would just have fun with it and like do it as a hobby. But the reason why I started so early was because I went to kindergarten when I was like 20 months. And I came back home one day and I started like playing like this Brahms lullaby melody on a toy piano. And then my parents like freaked out and they were like, "Oh my God, we need to get our lessons right away." And like
Okay.
that's sort of how I started. And once I was in it, I don't know, like I always really liked expressing myself through music, and it was almost like a toy to me that I could like bang on it and like make noise.
Yeah.
And yeah, and also I really liked how music, like, so I was also in chorus, and I told you I sang a little bit too. And like within doing that, I made a lot of friends, and music was always like a community sort of like thing. So I really liked that part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my parents always encouraged me, and they thought that it was nice that I had something that I was focusing on and I was like passionate about. But again, like they were always thinking that it would be better if I became a lawyer like my dad, or like
Yeah.
something a little bit more concrete. But
Right.
didn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. That's the danger of yeah, training your children in music as a hobby. They could always actually do it. You have to be careful.
Is it the danger? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Um, right. So, did you, I'm wondering like, so did you go to like a high school for the arts or anything like that? Like, at one point, like, I guess, at one point, did you sort of like really start concentrating on like music, as like something you could do, like, you know, not professionally, but something that would like you would do with your life?
So actually, I made that decision pretty early on. During my last year of elementary school and like first year of middle school, like school really wasn't like I didn't have very much fun at school. I didn't really like how I had to do all these things that I didn't really care for. I'm still like that. Things that I care for, I'm like all about it. But if I don't really like see the point, or like I'm not interested, I just can't get myself to be interested or engaged. But
Yeah.
so during the first year of middle school, I it really wasn't for me, so I quit school actually. I started being homeschooled, and I mean it also happened very like naturally. I came home one day and I told my mom that I didn't want to go to school anymore. And my mom was like, "Okay, then don't go." That's actually like how it happened. She was like, "Not a big deal, sure, don't
Okay.
go." So I didn't go, and I was homeschooled for about a year. But my mom thought that so in Korea the semester like a year begins in March, and
Mm,
I was born in March, so I was one of the younger kids in the
mm,
year.
mm.
That she thought that if I just like spent a year doing whatever I wanted, and if I had to go back to school, it wouldn't be such a big deal. So she told me that in a year, if I could graduate from high school, like she would send me to America to study music. So for that year, I didn't really meet any friends. I just studied really hard, and I actually got out of high school when I was 14.
Okay.
So and then I came to America with my mom. My mom also wanted to study, so that's when I left Korea.
Yeah. Cool. Um, so you attended the man's college,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's it's part of the new school, right? In New York, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think you're breaking up a little bit with the Zoom connection.
Sorry.
Clear now. You're clear now. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, you attended like Mann School of Music in New York, and that's part of the new school there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. What was tell me like what that was like, both just the school itself and your experience there, but also like this transition from Korea to the United States.
Sure. So when I came to America when I was 14, I really didn't speak very much English. So in the first 2 years here, I learned English and I also took private lessons, like piano lessons, to get into a conservatory. And I really wanted to go to a conservatory in New York, and so I went into Men's when I was 16, and I did piano for 2 years there. And then I was always improvising and I always was interested in composing. So I started improvising when I was around like 8. And during the time in New York, like the first 2 years, I realized that I wanted to compose more than play other people's music. So I transitioned into composing more and more, and I started composing like composition major when I was 18. But I mean, going to New York at 16 and living by yourself, when I look back, I have no idea how I survived. Like, really. But at the time, like, I didn't think too much about it. I thought it was, like, perfectly fine. But yeah, it was completely different. I mean, I had to have my own schedule and figure out what I'm gonna eat to how to do laundry and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And but New York has this sort of like energy where like when you're there and you're just a part of it and you're just so busy, you know? So I didn't really even have like so much time to think about what I was going through.
Yeah.
But I mean college was really fun. I'm sure you're having fun at Rice.
Yeah. Minus, a pandemic year, but
That is true.
but,
Yeah.
when
But
things got back to normal-ish.
right. But Manus was a super small school. So right now they've moved downtown, so the school's a little bit different than when I went. I was the last graduating class when it was uptown in New York. But it was about like 150 people in school, with just one tiny building, and so everyone knew everyone, and it was a really supportive environment, and like it was almost like a family like, and we all got to know each other really really well. So
Mm.
I really liked the support and like encouragement that my teachers gave me. And yeah, during that time I also did a lot of different things in New York. I did New Yorker Symphony, which helped me write like different chamber pieces and like small orchestra piece. And just like hearing my music played by a lot of different groups and people, like that definitely helped me a lot to sort of have an idea of what I wanted to do further. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess something I picked up on is like it seems like you had a lot of support, whether that was like
Just your friends and community, like back in Seoul, or like your mom who who let you quit and like study and focus on music, and also this environment you found at Maz. school. So like, I'm just wondering like how important do you think that sort of like communal support was to um, just to yourself, but also like your understanding of music. Uh, and was there any kind of like was there any sort of like how do I put this like notable like sort of conflict between like your desires and the desires of like those who were supporting you, like your parents?
Hmm. Well, of course, like the support and all that was super important. Also because that was already like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
When I look back, like composition environment, like this
Yeah.
industry was really dominated. It still kind of is.
Yeah.
It's very much dominated by like white male composers.
Right.
Right now, they're doing more and more. They're putting a lot of effort in diversifying the voice and also just the population of who composes. But when I look back in like a composition forum that I had to go to every week, I would be like maybe like one of the three female composers in the room with like 30 other male composers. So my teacher was really, really supportive and like he sort of made me think that I could make a career out of this, which was super important to me because it was already a very intimidating environment because there weren't people like me in the room, like physical, you know? So that was really important. But my parents, even up until like my years back, my dad still wanted me to reconsider my path, like career path. And he thought that I should maybe try to go to a law school. Like
Yeah.
he finally gave up on that thought because like I've gone further with my degrees and my career, but yeah, definitely. Like he always like supported me with what I'm doing, but also hoped that I would quit at some point, you know? So it was like a conflict thing there too.
Yeah.
But for myself too, I think it took me a while to be comfortable with who I am and what I do and just about my like existence and
Yeah.
identity because I'm still Korean. I'm not American and I'm Korean citizen, but I've lived here more than half of my life at this point. You know?
Yeah.
Am I breaking up? Oh,
You were
okay.
breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I've lived here like more than half of my life at this point.
Yeah.
So I've lived as a foreigner for such a long time that I had to almost find myself a space in this country to do what I do and also believe in myself that I can do what I do. And so it's been like definitely like a struggle a little bit, but and also during my undergrad, because I had a piano background, I never really played like chamber music or orchestra in orchestra or anything. So I definitely lacked in that sort of experience. So that was something that I also had to overcome and study a lot. So undergrad, I think, was really fun, of course, but like a lot of like self motivating and like self realization sort of like time that I spent.
Yeah. Um, what do you think there's a what are some like notable differences between like the music, like culture of like music training that you were in Korea and sort of the culture of music training that you had in the US?
Hmm. So it's like kind of hard to compare for me because when I was in Korea and studied music, I was
Okay.
still so young, you know?
Right, right.
But I've been through different schools, like enough schools now in the US that I could like see the differences here actually. Like
Okay.
some of the systems that they use and whatnot. But
Okay.
Korea, I think, is super focused. Like, if you want to become a musician, people kind of put that label on you at a really early age and prepare you for it the way that you need it. Like, I don't think it's as competitive here when you are a younger person, but like having competition experiences at the like age before like 10, that's totally normal in Korea. Versus
Yeah.
here, you don't make that decision until you're in high school or like late middle school.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. I've heard that difference for a lot of different professions actually between the US and like a lot of other countries where that kind of decision or label of like what you are professionally is usually foisted on you at a younger age.
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. Um, so a quick question. You said your mother also came with you to the US, but you were living on your own. So like she was studying elsewhere?
Yeah, so my mom and I lived in Connecticut for 2 years. My all my siblings came too.
Oh, okay.
After 1 month of being here by ourselves. So they were living in Connecticut, and I started living in New York by myself since I was like 16. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Um, so do you think you could share like favorite or like do you have a favorite or treasured memory of like I guess like a moment with a teacher like where like yeah some memory of like an instructive learning experience with a teacher um, that sort of like really shaped you yeah or a memory or two how many you want to recount.
Sure. I so this was when I was 21. I went to Bowden Music Festival during the summer, and I met this composer named Derek Vermel.
Okay.
He's a wonderful composer, and I had always been like a huge fan of his music. He was a composer in residence at Mannes like a year before, so I was like obsessed with his music, and I really wanted to study with him. So I went to Bowdoin, and before I met um, Derek Vermel, a lot of the teachers would talk about the things that I would have to improve on, like what's your voice, like what are you like trying to portray in this music, like you need to learn this, that. But then he was the first person to really point out the things that I was good at. And that was something that was really important to me because he talking about music in so many different aspects. Music is multidimensional. Like you can focus on so many different things in music, but like you can't be good at everything that you do in music. So he was talking about how I should focus on the things that I was already good at and I was gifted at, and then develop that. And one thing that he said was, I still have this sort of like playful like humor in my music. I really really like funny things, and I'm not like 100% like serious person all the time. And my music tends to be like that too. It's like very playful and like it's very like full of joy. And he was mentioning how like humor is a big thing about my music, and it's actually really hard to pull pull together in like classical medium. So he was talking about how I could maybe develop that sense in my music a little bit more. And the thing that he said was best humor comes from best timing. So timing was something that he wanted me to work on and think about a little bit more. And I'm still working on this like timing and structure in my music a lot. But yeah, like looking at my music in more like analytical way was really really helpful. And yeah, that was a very crucial comment that I heard during my undergrad. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, I've also had like some unfortunate experiences where I learned a ton from. I mean, as a female composer, these days, like, people are definitely more careful and sensitive, even though, like, it's not 100% like that yet,
Yeah.
but it's definitely different. But 10 years ago, like, ish, like, people would talk about my music. Like this very famous teacher listened to my music and said that my music was feminine, too feminine. But what does that even mean? You know, like how is music too feminine? And so just seeing me and who I am, and then listening to my music totally gave him the idea that like, oh, it was too feminine, like I'm not gonna take it seriously, sort of thing, you know. So that was something that I also wanted, like, also thought about a lot, what it meant to be a female composer and writing the music that I write. And then another composer, another really famous composer, um, listened to my music and he asked me why my music doesn't sound Asian. And that also
Oh gosh.
made me think about what I am doing a lot, you know? Because when you're asked a question like that, how do you really answer that, you know? But it was sort of in this like master class situation where like there were audiences being like a bunch of composers.
Yeah.
And when I was asked that, I was definitely flustered and like pretty upset, you know?
Yeah.
And my answer was that the fact that I came to the US to study Western classical music is because like I was interested in learning this medium of music, not like Korean traditional music.
Yeah.
But then, you know, as the years progressed, that comment actually means like like started to mean a lot to me because as I developed my music and as I developed as a composer, I did start to think about what it meant to be a Korean composer, not just a composer. So these days, I'm trying to find a good balance between writing what I do and where I come from and how I was trained and all these things, like trying to like merge it in like a harmonious way. So these like questionable comments have definitely made me think about music in the ways that I
Yeah.
might not have. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually remember like um in one of the bios that you have on like I mean there's various like, you know, like festivals and various like commissioning organizations that have your bio on their sites. And I think on one of them, I can't remember which, I was reading a list of people like you take classes with or studied with, and like, you know, recognizing a lot of names. I'm like, when you were telling me these anecdotes, I was like, I wonder which of those names, if any of them, said these things to you.
I
You
mean,
don't have to spill the tea. I understand why.
no, and
Yeah.
those people are usually not on my bio because, you know.
Yeah, yeah, no. I think I only found it like on one source or something like that. There,
This is really funny.
yeah, yeah, but I actually, I don't know if I'm going to dive into this straight away, but I do definitely have some questions about like, you know, like Western classical versus like other music and how like you see yourself within that and all that stuff.
Sure.
Um,
Mhm.
but let me see. So, um, if you don't mind, there's one thing I noticed on your resume that I'm like one masterclass thing I noticed on your resume that I wanted to ask you about. So you had one with Jin Suk, right?
Winsuk Chin, yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. Could you tell me how that was like? I'm curious.
Yes. That probably was one of the most intimidating and scary, like scary experience I've ever had in my life. That was am I breaking up? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was super, super intimidating and scary. Because, you know, she is somebody who I see as a role model. She she's an incredible composer. I mean, there's nobody like her at like right now, you know? She's her music is amazing and like her creativity and also like the way that she talks about music and like thinks about music, it's just like incredible. So just like having her look at my music, you know, just very intimidating thing. And she's actually known to be pretty critical about her own music and others too. And I think that's where the really like almost like perfectionist type of craft comes from. And so my music, it wasn't like, the regular lesson where they're like, wow, you're amazing, but maybe you work
Yeah.
on this little thing. She actually asked me questions,
Yeah.
which I felt pretty uncomfortable about. And it wasn't just about music that she asked, but so she studied in Europe and I studied in
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
So the style of teaching and writing music and like just thinking in general is quite different, I think.
Yeah.
And she looked through my music. I was like, should I play a recording for you? And she was like, no. Just like flip through all my scores. And then she asked me, well, you have quarter notes, eighth notes, half notes, sometimes whole notes. What do you want me to talk about it? And I was like, I don't know. What do I want you to talk about? So I mean, actually, like a lot of people, I don't know if this should be actually on the archive.
Okay, no, we can yeah, we're totally allowed to edit like as needed. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to tell you what happened. So
Yeah.
she's actually known to be super, super scary in lessons. Most
Yeah.
people walk out crying.
Yeah.
I didn't cry, so that was a good thing. But she she oftentimes tells people to maybe find a different career path. That is me putting it in the nicest way possible. But she looked at my music and told me that if I studied really, really hard, maybe in 20 years, I could become a composer. And I mean, I was pretty upset. And then she also told me that looking at my music, she can see that I need to suffer more to become a composer, whatever that means. And I thought that that was pretty shallow thing to say, since like she doesn't know me. She's seen me for half an hour, and how can she say that I need to suffer more based on
Yeah.
a few scores that she's looked at? And yeah, I am pretty like bubbly and loud, but like that doesn't mean that like she knows all about me. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it was a very cool experience to meet her and
Yeah.
like interact with her.
Yeah. I saw like one I think it was for like a festival or something. I saw like one interview with her on YouTube or something like that. Um it's the first like like video recording of her speaking that I'd like seen. I mean, I knew of some of her music, but it's the first video recording of her like speaking that I seen. And even in the first 30 seconds, I was like, such a scary person.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
actually.
a severe personality, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think she had a very unfortunate childhood. And
Yeah.
well, like I heard, so I also have some friends who had lessons with her in English. I think in English she's much more, I don't know, I think she's like friendlier. But I spoke to her in Korean. So that
Okay.
also, like how
Okay.
Korean has different levels of like respect when you speak.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like I walked in and she was just like the lowest tone already. I was like, okay, I see what this is.
I can imagine this in my head. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh I think I wanna like move on to like some positive experience.
Yes.
Not that not that we can control that, but yeah. Um, yeah. Let's see. I guess like, hmm, sorry, I might take a moment to find my bearings.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. Um, what would you say are like some of your biggest sort of like non-musical influences, like what you do?
Well, I really love cooking. So that's like one of my biggest hobbies. Um, yeah, I find a lot of similarities in cooking and composing. Like when I'm composing, I have to think about what I have, like instrumentation, the duration, and what they're asking for. Cooking is almost exactly the same. I have to look into my kitchen and see what I have and what I can put together in the amount of time that I have. So I actually spent a lot of time cooking, especially during the pandemic, and so I like doing that. I also watch a ton of basketball. Um, so I'm a huge Clippers fan. So I moved to LA after living in New York for 9 years, and LA was pretty rough, and I didn't have like that much to do, and so I started watching like a ton of basketball, and that year was a really fun year to follow NBA. So I got really into it, and the Clippers tickets were really really cheap because our team never really did well, and so I would pay like $8 to go see the game like whenever I wanted, and yeah, so I still watch a ton of basketball. What else? I really like having well, I really like seeing my friends and also like talking about music and like making music together. So I do a lot of collaboration. Um, Other than like doing commissions, I am usually like working with my friends, and like this past year I've written so much for people that I see regularly so that we could like try things together, and also like the more I know about the performer, I can write something that they could appreciate and I could appreciate, and when they're more honest with their playing, I think the performance turns out better too. So I do a lot of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, like I think you mentioned in your site bio, like
collaboration in like music is something that you really value. Um, I'm wondering if like uh, you could share some of your favorite collaborative experiences, whether that's in um, I guess like as you said, whether that's in the more like formal like commission type kind of setting where you're like rehearsing and etc. But also like these collaborations you do with friends and things like that. So what are some of your favorite collaborative experiences?
Yeah. So I have this music festival that I do. This is gonna be our third year. We do it in the summer, and it is to pair composers and guitarists together to create new works for guitar. So contemporary classical guitar is not really a thing. Like people are writing more and more for the guitar, but it's not always like the most celebrated instrument because it is pretty intimidating. Guitar is really really hard to write for. But when I moved to LA, I met a fantastic guitarist, a Korean guitarist, Bo Kyung-byun, and we've become really close friends. And we like basically like she had her own place, I had my own place, but like we would basically live together. Like I'll see her literally like 3 times a day, and so we got really close and we did everything together except that I never wrote for the guitar and I felt really intimidated by it. So one day I was like, you know what? Like, I should just do it. Like, you are right here, and I could try things out. And so I even bought a small guitar to try things out, but like that was way too hard. So I actually ended up giving my guitar to her so she
yeah,
could use it for teaching. But yeah, so I've written several pieces for guitar at this point, and the writing process is very specific for guitar. Like even though I've done it several times, like guitar is still like really difficult. Like cause sometimes like I would think that some things are really hard, but then like she would think, oh, like it's totally fine. Like it's not hard, and like vice versa. So when I'm composing for guitar, I have my like composition program on, and then I have the guitar fret like on one corner of my screen, and then like a chat with her.
okay,
So I write
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
like 2 lines of music, and then I'll send it to her through text, and she would tell me, oh yeah, this is doable, this is not doable, and she would play it and record it to me and send it to me right away. So it's very much like an organic experience where like I get to actually hear what it's gonna sound like, and then like with that recording as a reference, like the process is much like faster. But without having that sort of like collaborative effort, like I don't think I could write for guitar like I have done. And so I was in LA, but I moved away from LA, and we wanted to create this sort of like platform where we can get more composers and more guitarists to meet and write stuff. But also we wanted to have an excuse to meet each year, each summer, and like meet and hang out basically. So that was a big part of why we created this music festival. But last year, because of the pandemic, we couldn't do it in person. So we ended up commissioning 15 composers to write like 1 to 2 minute short guitar pieces, and we got I think 13 guitarists to play all these pieces. Like, and that was a very fun online thing. But we haven't seen each other for like 2 years, and I am planning on seeing her this summer. So we're gonna be making recordings together. I also just wrote another guitar piece for her, so we're gonna be collaborating on that. And another collaborative aspect that I really enjoy is like choreography and music. I've done several dance pieces by now, and I think it's just always so cool to see how music is expressed through body movements. Music is like a very, very abstract form of art, Like I could be writing about something, I don't know, like wind quintet, but then like for it to really like for the subject or like the theme idea to really come through, like that takes a lot of imagination from the listeners too.
Yeah.
And so, and also like one thing that's really cool about a dance project is that music gets to dictate the timeline of events and like moods and dynamic, but music somehow is in the background almost, and like the dance is in the foreground because like people are just more drawn to the visual aspect of the stage.
Yeah.
So I also really love just taking this much like pressure off of like my craft, but like having that as like a supporting factor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a choreographer that I've done 2 pieces with. His name is Fabio Adoricio. He is an Italian ballet dancer. He works in the Stuttgart Ballet, and we met actually in New York. I did a piece for New York Choreography Institute and New York City Ballet a few years back, and he and I were paired, and we met through Skype, and we talked a lot about what the piece can be and what he wanted to see and hear. And so, like the first piece was really really fun to work on. We just clicked and did it, and it was awesome. So we got another commission from the Stuttgart Ballet the following year, and I wrote a really big piece for it. I wrote like about a 20-minute long string quintet for this series of duets that he had envisioned. So I wrote the piece in LA, and I flew out to Stuttgart twice. I went to work on it with him and also the musicians before he could like bring the dancers to the musicians. So we did that, and then I went back to hear the premiere. And yeah, like I always love working with the choreographers because music is a huge like essential part of their work, but
Right.
the way that they hear music and the way that they experience music is totally different from musicians, where music is just like that's it. Like we
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so like, yeah, choreography and it also, I think I also read that like, oh, you also mentioned like, yeah, doing stuff with ballet and opera. And
so like these sort of theatrical elements or theatrical counterparts to and with music, that's something that you're into. I was wondering, like, I guess like this is like in general, like either when you're listening to or like composing music, um, do you often associate it with like things like imagery and narrative and things like that? Is there often that extra musical component you're imagining, I guess, when it comes to even just engaging with music on like a general level?
So actually, that's a really good question. So music is just very abstract, and like if I don't have something tangible that I can like think about and like imagine about, like I have a really hard time starting the piece or continuing the piece. So before I even write a single note, I think about what I want to write about, and I think about who I'm writing for. So if I'm writing for a specific person, we have a lot of conversations before. I at least like set up an hour meeting with them and tell them to just tell me about them or what they like, what they don't like, whatever.
Yeah.
Then I bounce off from that conversation to like come up with an idea. Or I also like to work with pre-existing musical elements. Like I've been using a lot of like Korean folk music and Korean folk tunes to create my own versions of those musical elements. So yeah, definitely. And also like I write a lot about my personal life and what I do every day. Like it could be something really mundane, but like I feel like if I can't relate to the music personally, I can't really create anything that's like engaging. So up until like the pandemic started, like once the pandemic started, everything changed. Like I was just home, so this didn't really mean anything. Like before that, I would like have a conversation with my friends, or like I would just like do something like whatever, and then like something would be funny or like interesting, then I'd write it down on my note and I would collect titles. So if I went to a museum and like I saw a really cool painting, I would like take down the title and like whatever like I saw about it, and then write about the painting that I saw. So like I would like collect titles before. Maybe I gotta start doing that now that I can get out of my house a little bit more.
Um, it's really interesting, yeah, to hear how like your working process kind of comes from and ties into like all these moments in your everyday life. That's yeah, that's cool. um,
Yeah. So didn't ask you explicitly yet about um, some schooling or just life chronology. So after Manus, you studied at Juilliard, and then you were in LA, right?
hmm
Okay, so yeah, could you tell me about yeah, what was it like studying at Juilliard, and then like yeah, what your time in LA is like, especially since, as you said, like that was like your first yeah, first new place after living in New York for such a long time in the US. So yeah, just yeah, tell me about Juilliard in LA.
Yeah, so Juilliard was really tough, actually. Um, I'm glad that I've done it, but if I look back, I don't want to go back doing that again, ever. Um, it was pretty competitive, and my class was really, really talented. Like everybody in my class was really, really good, and I probably was like not the best. Probably one of the bottom ones. So there were 7 composers in my year, and I was the only female composer. And that also made me feel a little bit uncomfortable because in the room there was just not a lot of people like me.
yeah,
And so I almost feel like I had to make my space for like I had to like prove something to like find my space, because also my teacher, who's a wonderful, wonderful person, and like he taught me a lot of things, but he had so many students that like to be even remembered weekly, I had to really prove myself. And so I had to work very, very hard, and all the classes were pretty demanding. And the first semester that I was there, I was like, there was one day at school, I don't know, I was there for like 10, 12 hours, something like that. And I was taking the subway back home. And I had realized that I had not spoken a word except for like to sing a dominant seven, like inversion of something in my year training class. And that made me feel really sad. It's like, is that
Yeah.
what I signed up for, you know? And so, but like as the time went, like especially the second year, I had a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends, and one thing that was really great about Juilliard was that obviously the performers were just excellent. They were fantastic, and really hearing my music played in that sort of like high level really gave me a motivation to write better music too. And so that was really, really awesome. And my teacher encouraged me a lot to write a lot. So one thing that I am pretty good at is I write fast. I'm very prolific. So he was talking about how my time at Juilliard, like the 2 years of masters, I should spend most of my energy and time writing music and making mistakes during school so that when I'm out of school, I know that I don't have to make those mistakes again. So I wrote like 11, like 13, 14 pieces a year, which is like a lot for a composer. But yeah, I got to hear a lot of my music performed, and yeah, it was fun. Partied a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
then
good. Yeah.
and then I moved to LA. So I really wanted to study with this teacher, Richard Danielpour. He's a great,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, I love his music. He's
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
so he had just gotten his job at UCLA, like, or he was about to. And so I wanted to study with him. So I more or less followed him to UCLA to do my PhD. But UCLA was a very different environment than I came from. So it was more of a just general university and then a music department, you know? And I had come from a very focused, like, conservatory background that it was hard for me to, like, relate to some of the people, I would say. Like, music wasn't taken as seriously as I was used to.
Mm.
And LA was like a pretty difficult city to get through. I felt like New York was like stressful, but small enough that you can meet people super easily. But LA is really, really big and like really spread out. And also like I
Yeah.
had to learn how to drive, which was a big
Oh,
deal. Like I didn't know how to drive at all. And so yeah, like it wasn't really like the school and also environment. Like I was going through a lot with like my family was going through a lot at the time too. So I didn't really want to continue living in LA anymore. So I decided to leave.
yeah.
Yeah, but I was there for about a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
my sister still lives
Oh, okay.
there.
So where did you go after that?
So that 1 year. So also, I think the reason why I really wanted to leave, like I had a lot of like
Okay.
different reasons for it. Like I had like financial issues and like like family issues and whatnot. But since going to Manus at 16, I had never taken a year off from school. So I think
Mm.
I just felt really burnt out, and I almost felt discouraged to like compose in a way because I was just like so in this like competitive sort of environment. So I didn't appreciate it anymore. So the year that I took off, I decided to do everything that I wanted to do, but I couldn't because I was in school. So I actually packed up two bags and moved to Berlin.
Okay.
I had always wanted to go to Oktoberfest. That was also the first thing that I did. So I had always wanted to go to
Nice.
Oktoberfest for years and years, but couldn't because it's always during the school year. So I packed up two bags, left, like got to Berlin, dropped my bags in my apartment, and then flew to Oktoberfest the next day. And then I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so I was in Berlin for about 3 months, and so I got a museum pass there. So every single day I went to at least one museum and I just walked around the city, and I also felt really like I felt the need to be alone after having lived in so many like big cities. So I would go without like communicating or really like doing anything with like people for like days. And like that was really good for me because I just wanted to like think about the long-term goals that I had, and also like I wanted to listen to a lot of music. And
Yeah.
yeah, so the 3 months in Berlin, it was really interesting because that was also my first time not being super close to a piano.
Okay. Yeah.
So during that 3 months I never played the piano.
Oh, okay.
So composing without the any sort of piano, like that was a new experience for me because I like to improvise and like check things out on the piano. So that was interesting. I listened to a lot of music. Um, Saw a lot of concerts and operas, which was also great. I also went to Spain. I always wanted to visit there. So yeah, I did that for a while, and then I came back to Korea and then traveled a ton. I went to Japan, I went to Russia, I went to a lot of different places in Korea. And about a year of that, I mean, I was getting really comfortable because my mom would just like do everything for me. I didn't have to think about like paying rent. And so I
Right.
was like, maybe this is a thing. But then my parents really wanted me to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I applied to uh, the program at Rice. I also applied to Royal Conservatory of Music in England, and yeah, I don't know. I thought that Rice had just like a very nice and supportive environment, and like the faculty just seemed really awesome. So I came here. But yeah,
Yeah.
traveled a ton.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. You've been in a lot of places over your life, for sure.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Let's see. So, I'm wondering, like, I think I'm gonna go to like, I guess that subject I mentioned earlier of like, just your relationship with classical music, whatever that means, and specifically like, um, what is like your relationship to uh, like classical like tradition, sort of the establishment of the conservatory system, and like, yeah, like, do you see yourself like as part of like this like these Western classical lineages, whether historic or contemporary, and if you don't see yourself like that way, like in what ways do you see yourself as like deviating or innovative or things like that?
Hmm. So yeah, so my musical training has been completely focused in this like Western canon. I learned theory and I learned the classical piano since I was a really young person, and so my background definitely is that, and I feel the most comfortable with that medium. But over the past like few years, I started growing more interest in Korean folk music, and that began because I got commissioned by the National Theatre of Korea like a few years back. And when I got that commission, I was super thrilled, but also I had no idea how to approach it because I don't know if you've seen their orchestra, but it's all Korean instruments.
Hmm.
It's Korean instruments, and it's like a large orchestra. And I basically didn't know more than half of the instruments that were sitting on the stage. So,
Oh.
and when I got that, I was living in LA, so I didn't really have an access to any of these instruments. So the way I learned about these instruments was through books, which is super limiting because I'm trying to like do music, but like books, like it doesn't. What does that tell me? And then I saw a lot of YouTube videos of like what these instruments sound like. So it was basically me guessing. And I made whatever I made flew out to Korea. First rehearsal, I was completely shocked. Like most of the estimates that I made, like I don't know, I was super off. So there was like one instrument.
Wait, you
It's
were
called
breaking up a little bit. Sorry. Do you
okay.
think you could start from like, okay, you flew to Korea, you got there, and then what happened? Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Yeah, so I flew there and then I got to the first rehearsal and I realized that I was completely off. Like I don't know, like I my estimates were just not right. And
Okay.
there's one instrument called taepyeongso.
Uh,
And you know what that is?
No, I
It
don't.
looks like a trumpet at the end, but it also has a reed like an oboe.
okay.
So when I saw and heard the instrument on YouTube, I was like, okay, so it's like a hybrid of like oboe and trumpet. Ah, okay, like I can maybe do something with that. I went there and I realized that yes, it was kind of like oboe and trumpet, except that it's like 40 times louder than I expected. So I was like I didn't know what to say, you know. I was like, wow, thank you, wow, that was surprising, like pretty much like all I can say. And then like we worked on like tempo and like other things like that. But then after the first rehearsal, I had to meet with the taekwondo player. I was like, I'm sorry, like that's just not what I like expected you to sound like. And then so we ended up like editing a lot through, but I almost felt embarrassed how little I knew about my own culture and my own music and like instruments from my own country. So like being thrown in that position was a really great like segue for me to learn about these things. Even though the performance, I mean, like it was a gigantic performance too at the National Theater, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
how is it gonna go? But it went fine. Like, so there were four pieces, and all the other people, like all the other composers, had Korean music background, so
Okay.
they knew exactly what to do. Except for me, I also had a piano in it too, so my piece sounded very different from what they were used to. But since that experience, I started doing a little bit more research in like Korean folk music, and I've recently gotten more into learning about the rhythmic modes of Korea. And I then realized also that like I was used to and like I was familiar with these tunes and like these sounds. It's just that I never like categorized it in the way that Western music has been for me. So these days I've been like trying to make a connection between what I'm trained with and where I come from, and also like I'm still young, so like I can still train myself in a new medium. So I'm really interested in doing that and sort of like merging the two different cultures that I have and grew up with. And like one thing that I wanted to add also is that like because I moved a lot, like since at a young age, I moved all the time. Like the longest place that I lived in was like 2 years, like even now. And so having moved so much, I almost like don't really have a home. Like I would go back to Korea, and a lot of the times I would get to the airport and my dad would pick me up and then drive me to a completely new area that I don't know about because they had moved. My mom really likes moving for some reason. So, like when I think about the idea of home, I almost don't have one, you know? Like home, I guess, is where my parents are, but at the same time, like they just moved this year, and I have no idea what the place looks like, where they are. So, like that's not really home, you know?
Yeah.
And then because I've moved so much, like I also don't have a home personally. So that sort of like was a really difficult thing for me. Like I felt that I didn't really have a place to go back to. But I think having lived and like having grown up that way, I almost became this sort of like hybrid of like different cultures. And I think that experience gave me the room and like courage to just like pack up and leave and like live in Berlin. And also like musically too, like I am super interested in like learning about different types of music, so not just like Korean folk music, but I'm really passionate about like jazz. I love jazz, and like I
Yeah.
listen to jazz mostly actually. And so like that's something that I also heard a lot, like living in New York, you know. I would go to jazz bars and like, hang out with friends, and like I would hear like these amazing jazz musicians like improvise in New York like very often.
Yeah.
So like all these different like little things that here and there, like it's definitely made me become who I am and like become the composer that I am. So I would say I'm not just limited to like writing Western classical music, whatever that is, you know, like Western
Yeah,
classical
yeah.
music
That's
has
why I put it in like quotes. It's like Western classical.
every, yeah, it's like everything. Like the music that I write is like, you know, like I write notes and like chords and, you know, things that one would be familiar with. But then people could literally like write anything and whatever. And that's also classical music. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that doesn't have notes or chords and is still still
Like,
music anyway. So yeah. Um, yeah. It's yeah, it's cool. Um, so like so since that National Theater Commission, what other like Korean folk music inspired things have you worked on?
so I've done a ton. One of the guitar pieces that I wrote several years back, it was based on this very famous folk tune called Pangang I almost made like a demon variation of that tune for solo guitar. Recently, I wrote a piece for a violinist Lucia Lin. She is a violinist at Boston Symphony, and she commissioned me a piece for violin and piano for her In Tandem project, which is really, really cool. She's gathered like 10 composers to write about what it means to be who you are at this confusing time. And so I used one of the very famous Korean lullabies into the piece called Samjibagi. That means a child on an island. And so I've done that piece, which was really like it was a meaningful project for me also because of the pandemic. I haven't been able to go back home. I haven't been back in Korea for over like almost like 2 years at this point, like a year and a
Yeah.
half. Yeah, so writing that piece almost reminded me of home and you know my family, and I missed my sister's wedding too, which is terrible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, so that piece was definitely all related to that. I've also done a piece. Actually, recently I did this really cool project where um, the piece was supposed to be inspired by this genre trot. So trot is a genre found in Korea.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
So
yeah, I know it. Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
and it's like very much like folksy, and it's
Yeah.
almost like country music of Korea. So
Right.
I did a piece where I gave like a you know my own take on trot. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Yeah. I'd love to hear that. Um, awesome. Yeah. So, I guess I feel like we've already touched on a lot of like subjects relating to this question, but I'm trying to word it in a way where like it hits at something something a bit more general, I guess. So do you think of yourself like when you're sort of like labeling yourself, I guess, or labeling yourself or your music, um, like do you label it as like like, oh, I'm a Korean composer, or like do you is do you feel like you're um like do you like sorry um yeah, so do you think of yourself as like a Korean composer, or if that's not like the label you would use, like how would you sort of label yourself?
So like this being a composer and looking like me and being like me, it's a very interesting thing because a lot of the times they talk about my music and what I do and all that as like a female composer work, a female composer this. And when I signed up for being a composer, I signed up to be a composer, not a female composer. But this label, like there's always like something else that comes before composer for me. So
Yeah.
who I am. But yeah, I am Korean, and I guess that makes me a Korean composer. But also, like I think that I'm a composer. Like I don't think that I'm like Korean composer or female composer. I am female, I am Korean, but I'm
Yeah.
also a composer. So like I kind of like see that as like a separate thing almost. But it's all me.
Yeah.
I think labeling is tricky because labeling, sure, like it's easier to like categorize me if it needs to be done, but it's almost like limiting for myself. It's like limiting for myself. Like I don't know if I'm gonna live in America for the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm gonna go back to Korea. I honestly don't know where I am going to be even in like 2 years because I'm gonna be done at Rice in about 2 years.
Okay.
And then like it's up to me. And that is like scary but also like pretty exciting that I can choose to be wherever I want it to be.
Yeah.
So like identity is something that's like very important to me, but like I don't want to limit myself for just that label.
Yeah. I guess that makes me think of the comment you made, or that makes me think of the comments you got, like in those lessons with those famous composers, where they were like, "Oh, this sounds feminine. Why doesn't this sound Asian?" And it's like a lot of the times, like it's like you know, these like a lot of like Western white composers, like um, they can be like polyvocal and like draw from all these different sources,
Right.
but they because of that it's not like but their music is like still their own. It's not like sort of categorized in that way, but like I feel like when it comes to yeah, a lot of music by people of color or non-men, it's like uh a lot of people are like, your music needs to sound like a specific way in order to fulfill those categories, when like you know each it's more like each person like creates those categories, which may not be so simple like for themselves, and like they don't have to express that category in a way that's like in a way that's sort of like um that's sort of limited to just one culture or like things like that. So I totally understand.
Right, especially now that all the cultures are so blended together. We are all super connected, and so just saying like, "Oh, you're this," it's just like, what does that even mean? And
Yeah.
also, like, one thing that's really like kind of like interesting for me is that when I go back to Korea, they always know that I've been abroad for a long time. They don't see me as one of them. You know what I mean? So then, like, I mean, earlier, like in my year, that was really hard for me. I would like go to, I don't know, even like a supermarket and like have a very short conversation with the cashier, and she would know that I wasn't from there. And so that made me think that I don't belong anywhere. But that also is and that made me really like that was very challenging for me. But now I kind of like it that I don't belong anywhere because that means that I have a possibility to belong anywhere. You know what I mean? I don't have
Yeah.
to be in one place. And going off of like what I had said about that, like, oh, your music is like too feminine comment.
Yeah.
So when the teacher said that, I was like, what does that mean? And then I was like, okay. And then his suggestion of me not sounding so feminine was you should listen to more Yana Chick. Like how what like I thought that was just like so funny to me.
It's like
All right, I will listen to more Yana.
Janacek is obviously the alpha male composer.
Exactly. what does that mean about Janacek?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I did listen to more Janacek afterwards, and I love Janacek, but
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
that's like, like I feel really confused about that. And
Yeah.
actually, like another really funny comment that I got was so last year I had a piece performed at Minnesota Orchestra.
Okay.
It's the piece that you heard, the Bird Up.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the Eric Andre show one.
Yeah, so Bird Up, that orchestra piece is like very much New York. It has a lot of like Gershwin and like it's got a lot of like jazz influence and also like it's this like pop culture, like Eric Andre's show influence. So I hear that piece and I associate it with sort of this like American sound. But I had it performed at Minnesota Orchestra and like, like with living composers, they like to invite composers up on the stage to introduce the piece and myself and whatever. And after the performance, this like gentleman comes up to me and says, "Oh, your piece was wonderful. It sounded very Asian." And that made me think a lot about this whole thing about introducing myself before the piece begins. Like he saw me and I'm Asian, so my music must sound Asian.
Mm.
And that doesn't even mean that it actually sounded like, whatever that means, whatever Asian sounding music is. And so and all those like comments and, my experiences, like it makes me feel reluctant about like categorizing myself or other composers too. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Um,
So, I think the questions I have left um, are sort of more about like sort of very recent times, like Houston in quarantine, but also like yeah, just maybe like some basic superlative stuff too, like maybe just talking about some of your favorite compositions of yours or influences for composers. So I think that's what I'll cover in the last bit here. So yeah, could can you tell me about your time at Houston and Shepherd so far? I know that it was, I guess, cut off like kind of early by the pandemic, but yeah, so far, how has how has Houston been for you? Like, what was the change of pace like? How did you find, you know, the school and the learning environment and all that stuff?
Yeah, so first of all, I love Houston. I really like Houston. When I first decided to come to Houston, I had no idea what it was gonna be like, because I even did the interview over Skype. I hadn't come to Houston before
Mm.
I came here for the first semester here. And so I showed up with two bags, and I kind of felt scared about it at first because it was Texas, and Texas is Texas, and so I was a little bit like I don't know about this, but then actually like I learned that it's a super diverse city. It's a big city with a lot of culture. There's always something interesting going on. There's a lot of art. There's a lot of just like activities, and I love how it's closer. It's like super close to the nature too. Like if I wanted to go to a mountain, if I wanted to go to the beach, like it's all here, which is amazing. I really like that about Houston. And I find that Houston, like people too, are very welcoming and like very like supportive of like different types of people and like whoever. And I really like that about the city because the big cities that I had lived before, like sometimes like big cities can be pretty difficult. But Houston was always very welcoming, which I am very grateful for. And my experience at Shepherd has been like it couldn't have been better. Like I really, really love the private teachers that I've had. I studied with Anthony Brent in the first year, and
I had a composition practicum with him once.
oh,
Yeah, I like Dr. Brent a lot. He's super cool.
like Dr. Brand is actually the best composition teacher I've ever had. He
Wow.
yes, actually, like I've had a lot of different teachers,
Yeah,
but whenever I have a question, I ask Tony, nobody else. Like he always like comes up with like questions and things to think about that would be crucial for me at that moment. And it wouldn't just be about like that one measure that I'm like iffy about, but it would be like a bigger picture question of like, why are you iffy about this? And then like he would tell me stories to sort of like find my own answer to it. And yeah, I really enjoyed working with him in the first year. And Karim also was an amazing teacher. I studied with Karim Alzan this year, and yeah, like he and I only had lessons over Zoom actually. So that was an interesting experience, but I learned a ton. He always had like really great suggestions for music listening. Like I got to learn about a lot of the rap that I didn't know about, which was really good. And yeah, and all my classes have been really helpful. I really like how they focus on the practical elements of like going to school. Like it's not just about, like learning about music theory. Like we all know music theory by now, or maybe not, but I've learned it before. But we have like classes for writing resumes, writing artistic statements. Like those are very important for
Mm.
like musicians at our level. So I really am appreciative of all of that. And yeah, and also like the musicians and like students at Shepherd too, like we're all very, very supportive, I think. And I've never had a problem getting performers to play my music, which is amazing. And yeah, in Houston too, like I got really lucky and got the Camera Young Artist Program residency like from the first year, and so that got me to do a lot more like community works and a lot of like community engagement, and also I met a lot of musicians and people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So that has been amazing, and I also worked with Musica this year. I got the commission, so I had a piece performed at the Contemporary Arts Museum at Houston. So I've I've been like super fortunate and gotten a lot of opportunities in Houston, and yeah, I'm super happy that I made a choice to come here.
Yeah. What's your favorite thing about the city?
You know, not the weather for sure. Um, you know,
Yeah, I feel you.
I really love all the parks that Houston has. Like I had no idea. First of all, I had no idea this city was gonna be this big. But within this big city, you can always find some sort of peace if you need it. And especially during the pandemic, I went to parks all the time. I went to Herman Park. I went to Memorial Park, Manil Park. Like all these parks are just so amazing. And also, I really like the food culture here. Like food culture is huge,
Yeah.
and there's always something interesting and new to try in Houston. So I really like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, one of the great pluses of urban diversity is a rich food culture, definitely.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So, how would you say like the classical music scene in like Houston, or like the art music scene in Houston, like um, what stands out to you about it? Like, how is it different from like the art music circles you've been part of before?
Yeah. So first of all, it's very different from the scenes that I was in New York or LA. Like New York and LA, they're both already like very much like established places. So sometimes it can be pretty difficult to like trap in classical because there are so many musicians
Sorry,
and so many composers.
I
Like
think you broke
it's
up a
like
little
full.
bit. I,
No,
Stu, sorry,
and
can you
also
start
like,
from
can I? Yes, and can I bring my charger? One sec.
all right, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you can start from like you said it was very difficult in LA and New York to
Mhm.
yeah.
So New York and LA are already like very much like established cities that And also like it's a very they're both like artistic cities. There are a lot of musicians, there are a lot of composers, like it's everywhere. So
Yeah.
sometimes it can be challenging to crack into that circle and make yourself, like noticeable. But Houston is a growing city, so that I feel like there are a lot of new opportunities for young composers and young musicians. And even just like having this like the camera and like music opportunity, like that was amazing because I got to share my music with like audiences that I wouldn't normally like interact with. So in the camera, I worked with this school called the Hub Houston, and it's a school for neurodivergent students. And I wrote a school song for them this year, which was super fun. I got to meet these students, and like they talked about like what the school meant for them and what friendship and like all these like really awesome things that I wouldn't normally talk about with classical listeners, classical music listeners. So, like Houston has given me opportunities that I would not have received elsewhere, and I really really like that. And yeah, and also like I think people have less of like judgments about what they want to hear or what they're expecting to hear, because like everyone's just still curious, and like everyone's like very, I don't know, like excited about this like new growth of like music and like culture, and and so I feel like it's been more supported than ever, and it's been super encouraging to be in Houston. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so what was your so once the pandemic began, uh yeah, how did your life change for you? And yeah, how do you live your life during quarantine?
Yeah,
Now
so
that we're coming out of it,
I know.
how do you feel?
Yeah, it's crazy. So actually when the virus just began in China, I was actually in Asia. I was in
Oh,
Japan. I was in Tokyo for a performance. And I started hearing about this virus. And then I spent a few days in Korea, and like the news was like going crazy about this. And so I was already scared starting January, and I brought like a bunch of masks just in case. And like I was telling my friends about it, but like people wouldn't really believe me that it was super serious. Like I mean, I also didn't think that it was gonna come all the way here. But once the pandemic started, it was right around my birthday. I was out for my birthday, and I got the email from school that the school was gonna get canceled. And yeah, that I mean, because that was my first year in Houston,
Mm.
like it was really hard to
Yeah.
make adjustment of locking myself in. I didn't really feel like I experienced the city enough. I was just getting comfortable with being in this new environment.
Mm.
But yeah, I spent a lot of time, of course, like at home. I started cooking more. Um, then I gained weight, so I started working out
Me
hard.
too. Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't work out actually, but I did gain a lot of weight.
and so I got really into working out because I had all this like energy, but I couldn't go out and like meet people or do anything. So I would just do like home workouts all day long, and so I'm very nocturnal. I like writing from around like 10 p.m. like 2 a.m. So am I cutting off?
Yeah, but I think I heard everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so like I really like writing around like 10 p.m. to like 2, 3 a.m. So my schedule switched completely. Last summer I would go to bed around like 10 a.m., like 11 a.m. ish, like around like right before lunchtime for most people, and then I would wake up around like 4, 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I wrote a ton of music because, if you shift your schedule that way, the times that you can talk to people, like it's very limited, you know. Everyone is gone to bed by the time that I'm really awake.
Yeah.
I wrote a ton of music, which was good. Um, but you know, it's interesting because once this pandemic happened, I started reconnecting with a lot of my friends and a lot of the collaborators that I had worked with before. So in a way, like the world feels a little bit smaller than it was before the pandemic. Like before, like if I wanted to work with somebody, I felt the need to like fly there and meet them in person. But now we don't really have this like rejection towards like meeting over Zoom. Like this has become so natural to us.
Yeah.
I've I've written a lot of like solo pieces for my friends all over the world for them to like have premieres online and like so I've somehow gotten like even more active with the writing and performances during the pandemic. I guess which you know it's been good.
Yeah. That's cool.
I've been busy.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, yeah. So like you you said you've been listening to like a lot of music. Yeah. What are some of the things you've been listening to? And also like if there are any sort of like yeah, if there are like any sort of long-term influences on your music as well, like yeah, what composers or pieces of music influence you, and also like what have you been listening to recently?
Yeah, so recently, I had a student in my 317 class in the
Okay.
fall, and in my class every morning we have one person share what they like to listen to. I thought it was like a fun way to like get to know
Yeah.
each other and also like
Chelsea did that too last semester.
yeah, well, I started it and she learned. We're very good friends. We're very very close.
Nice, nice. Yeah.
So that's like one of my favorite things about that class. You know, like I got to learn a lot about a lot of new music that I didn't know about. And one of the students shared Esperanza Spalding, and oh my gosh, like her music is so cool. It's like jazz, but also like she sings, she plays bass. Like it's
Yeah.
very interactive, and I really really
Yeah.
like her music. So I've been listening a lot to that. Um, I love this band from Australia called Hiatus Coyote. Like they've been my favorite like musical influence for a very long time. They're coming up with a new album very soon, which I'm very excited about. And like Bill Evans and Chet Baker, like they've been a huge influence for me, especially like harmonic writing. I love how Bill Evans like voices his chords and also like they're just like really beautiful, you know? Like I really love their music. I love bossa nova. I love Jobim, like a lot of jazz
Yeah,
influences.
yeah.
And then I've always loved the French music. I love Ravel. Like Ravel's definitely one of my favorite composers. I love Do to You too, like for like all the textural and like gestural things that he does in his music. I also really, I used to listen to more operas too. I love Puccini, like melodic writing. Like you can't beat Puccini. He just does it the best. And so yeah, and of course, like I come from the piano background, so I listen to a lot of piano composers too, like Rachmaninoff, Liszt. I also love like Fauré, like a lot of French influences though, like Satie and Poulenc. And
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Um, what about like any like contemporary composers that you really like or influence on you?
so I really love the music of Esa-Pekka Salonen.
Salonen.
Yeah, like his piano concerto was like on for 3 months straight for me. Like I love his music. And I would say the music that I listen to the most is by Michael Torke. Like Michael Torke's music has been a huge influence for me. Like I love
I can
how
hear that, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I do see that. Yeah.
yeah, like his music mostly utilizes like triadic harmonies, you know? But like he does it in a way that's so different and organic and like he's always just so on point about timing. of events, and I really love like his craft of like composition. And like he has a new piece that was recorded like last year, I think, called Being. I listened to
I've
this.
listened to that. Yeah.
Yeah, such a great piece. I love yeah, like I love his work, and I really like David Del Tredici. He also writes
Yeah.
very like fun tonal music that's kind of unusual, especially for the time that he was living. Like people are writing much more atonal music, but
Yeah.
he really started his own belief and sound world. And of course, like I love like music by my teachers. Like Beezer is a great composer. Like his
Yeah.
brass music is amazing, and I
Robert
love,
Beezer.
yes, Robert
Yeah.
Beezer.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, of course, like Daniel Ford, like his orchestra music is like just wonderful. Like he's very good at like orchestrating, and his understanding of orchestra is just like unlike anybody else. And I've also gotten to I've been like super fortunate to meet and work with the composer Gabriela Lena Frank. She has been a huge influence and like inspiration for me. Like Gabriela Elena Frank just does so much more than just music. She's very active about diversifying compositional voices, and like she actually created her own academy where she invites composers from all over the world, like with all different backgrounds, and she sort of creates this like safe environment where you are welcome to express your music the way that you want rather than thinking about how it's going to be received. I think which I think is super important, and like not always done in like these music schools. Like you always have to think about how it's going to be received. And
Mm.
yeah, her music is influenced by a lot of backgrounds that she comes from. She has like a very multicultural background too. And yeah, just working with her has been incredible, just really eye opening too. Like
Yeah.
this composition world can be not the most encouraging for
Yeah.
somebody like me, but she is
Yeah.
somebody like me. She's a female composer, and she's like multicultural background based
Yeah.
composer. So yeah, just seeing her and how she uses her influence as a composer in like the most positive way in the world, like that's been very important to me. Yeah.
Um, I think I have a. I Yeah. I think we'll be. I think we'll be done by 6 or so. But I have like a few, just 3 more questions for you. Um, so
And they're all pretty broad. So what's your what's your like compositional process, for lack of a better word? Like I know you mentioned earlier that you often like visualize something before you start working on a piece of music, but yeah, could you take me through like how you usually write something? And of course that might have changed with time, but yeah, what's your process look like?
Yeah, so before writing anything, like I said earlier, I need to know what I'm writing about. So I would usually come up with a title or like an image that I'm writing about. And then I think about the duration of the piece. Usually, like I know how long the piece is supposed to be because commissions always come with like a specific timeline. So let's say I have an 8-minute piece that I have to write, then I think about how I could divide this time in the way that's interesting musically. And so I'll think about sort of like the division and connection. And then I always write from left to right. So I start in the beginning. Like a lot, some people do like collages of music and they put it together, but that just doesn't seem to work for me. So I would have maybe like a few musical ideas that I come up with by like improvising on the piano, and then I would write it down, and then I would start from there, and then see what happens. And a lot of the times, the plans that I made before I wrote the music don't work when I start writing music. But sometimes, at some point, like in your music, your piece becomes like this like living thing that it gives you answers that you didn't know about. And so I tend to follow those yeah, whatever the music tells me. And yeah, and when I'm working with somebody like a smaller ensemble, let's say like a duo or something, then I would send my music to the person before I finish it and like see how it sounds and like get feedbacks from them and like what's hard, what's not, like what could be better. I so composing is such an isolating thing that whenever I can have this sort of like interaction with other people, like I always welcome that. I love working with people like in time. So yeah, like I sent my pieces to like my friends, and sometimes they would tell me, "Ooh, like this is not so good." Then I would be like, what would be better?" And then I
Yeah.
usually like listen to their advice. Yeah, but yeah, I work. I mean, so some people are very specific about where they write, how they write, and all these like like columns that they have to check before they do it. But for me, like I really sit down and do it. Like I don't really have to like plan it in the way that's like very yeah, like detailed. I sit down and then I do it, and yeah, it's fun. I
Yeah.
like composing. I think it's super fun, and also like
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting job because I'm basically telling people how they should spend this much time like listening to something. I'm like dictating their time. And like visual art is interesting because like you could spend years right like painting this thing, but people could decide how long they're going to look at that painting. It could be 2 seconds, it could be 2 hours, but like music, I'm giving them exactly how long they should sit there for. And so it's almost like a selfish thing, I feel. It's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna say something and you're gonna listen to it for 8 minutes and you're gonna clap after. It's yeah.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I remember you were saying earlier, like timing is something you really try to hone with your music, and it really is a unique medium for that reason.
Right.
This dimension of time. Yeah. So, what are some of your like? What are like a couple of your like favorite compositions that you've done?
Um so actually like a few months ago I had a string quartet premiered at the Moody Center. And it was called Can You Stop the Time? No. And so during the pandemic, like the time has been like a really interesting thing. It almost feels like time has stopped, but it didn't. And like the way that the time was spent also during it was super interesting. Like we would sit in front of Zoom classes and Zoom whatever for hours and hours, and like those times time would go so slowly. Like a minute could feel like an hour, but then like human interaction was so rare that anytime that I got to spend time with my friends, it would go so fast. So I wrote a piece about how the time is always like, like going at this the same pace, but like the way that we perceive it is so different depending on the texture and like the gesture and like how you spend the time. So that piece was a really really fun piece for me to write for, and also because I really wanted to write a string quartet for years and years, and somehow I never got to until
Hmm.
this year. I somehow got a ton of string quartet commissions, so I wrote two, and I'm writing two more this year. So yeah, that was my second string quartet I wrote this year, and that was very fun. And I would say, so for the orchestra piece that I mentioned earlier, like that piece is a really special piece for me because, like I mentioned before, also that like I don't really have like a chamber or like orchestra music background. So orchestra music was always like something that I was really really scared of writing. Like it's intimidating, like you write this thing all by yourself and then you bring it to the stage and there are like hundreds of people, and you have no idea how it's gonna go. So, and like before Bird Up, like I had a few orchestra pieces that I wrote, but I was never quite like satisfied with them. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. And so for this piece, this was the first time that I turned a piano piece into an orchestra piece. That really helped me because when I have a piano piece already, I know how the notes are gonna go. I know the rhythm. I know how the time is gonna be spent. So that I just have to think about the color and like the orchestration aspect of the music. But having said that, orchestra speaks at a much different rate than a piano. Piano is like very, it's almost like a percussion instrument, like you hit it and then you get the note and you get it right away. But orchestra, they're very good at like sustaining, but like delivering something so fast, it takes time. So I would have to like repeat things a lot or expand some of the sections. So the piano version was maybe like 3 minutes long, and the orchestra piece is about like 8 minutes, I think, eight
Mm.
9. So having done that piece like made me feel that maybe I could write for orchestra too. And I had just so much fun working on that piece. It was about Eric Andre show, which I love, and I wrote that piece in LA. And like during that time, I really missed being in New York. So writing that piece almost like reminded me of being there and like what it was like. And that was read and performed at Aspen Music Festival, and just like working with the orchestra and the conductor, like that was a great experience for me. And that piece has been performed several times afterwards. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Um, okay. So I think the last thing that I want to ask is, do you mind sharing one thing you love about yourself?
About myself,
Yeah.
but um, let me think how I would word this. Well, okay, so I really like how I am pretty adventurous, and I yeah, my comfort level is like I yeah. Let me do that again. Actually, yeah, I am. So something that I really love about myself is that I am adventurous, and I am not afraid of like going somewhere else and trying something new. And I think that it's like super exciting to see the world and see what it has to offer to me. And, and like lived in this like focused like musical environment, I feel that the world has so much more to offer to me, but I just haven't seen it enough. That like yeah, I am not afraid of packing up 2 bags and showing up at somewhere and figuring it out from there. And I've done that. And when I see other people who have grown up in like one house and then like went to college this way, like they're very afraid of going somewhere else and living somewhere else. But yeah, I'm not like that. And also, I try to be very positive in any sort of like circumstances. I always like think that like things are gonna work out the way that it should. So yeah, I'm pretty like brave in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, well, I think that's all I have on my end. If do you have like, is there anything else that you would want to talk about, or any questions you've always wished you would be asked, or anything like that?
I don't know. We talked about me for a long time now. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
You
This is a
said, yeah, now that you've said through two of these, you know all about me.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I'm really yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you um over the past couple of hours and getting to know you. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Yeah,
And
it was great to
yeah, it's just great to learn all this stuff about you. Yeah.
And let me send you the link for the National Theater of
Yeah,
Korea.
I was trying to like I tried to find it online because it seemed really interesting and I just couldn't. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long piece. It's like 20 minutes long, and there are
Okay.
some good parts, but as soon as you start, you'll see this like oboe trumpet thing that like ruined everything for me.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so like I don't have that whole piece like posted, but I think I have like clips of it somewhere.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, yeah. Well, okay. Have a good rest of your evening and
Thank you.
yeah.
And will I get a draft of this before you guys like post it, or like how?
Yeah, we send all of our transcripts to interviewees for review before we upload it or anything like that.
Cool, because like I might not want like
Right, we talked about that earlier. So like I actually made note of that. I made note of that part, so I'll definitely bring that up with Dr. Chow and Anne, and yeah, just let you know, yeah, let them know. But also, you'll get to look at it, and you'll get to have a say, like have total say in that.
perfect. Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. Bye.